See, hello friends, welcome to today's chapter, Isaiah chapter 2, Choose to be Humble. I'm very excited to share this chapter with you guys. There's a lot of truth and doctrines we could learn from this chapter, and there's a lot of cool stuff in here. Choose to be humble, we'll see, is the theme I picked for this chapter, because ultimately it's up to us to choose to follow God or follow the things of this world. And that's what one of the main points Isaiah is going to drive really hard in this chapter. Another note about this chapter is some people out there say that there's two different parts in this chapter and they should be in separate chapters. That's what verses 1 through 5 should be chapter 2, and the rest of the book, the script chapter should be a different chapter, chapter 3. This should not be the case. And there's a reason why these chapters are put together, and I want to explore that with you guys here at the end of this presentation. This chapter is also another vision that Isaiah sees, and he is going to explain why he's telling us about this vision here in this verse we're about to read. So, verses 1 through 5, the word that Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. So this is a vision about Judah and Jerusalem. Verse 2, and it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of God, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. O house of Jacob, come ye, and let us walk in the light of the Lord. There's a couple interesting points I want to point out here. So in verse 2, it says, in the last day. So this vision is concerning the time before the Lord comes. That the mountain of the Lord's house, so we're already, Isaiah sees a temple in the mountain, and it shall be established in the top of the mountains. There's an S at the end of mountain, so there's going to be multiple temples all around the world, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. That kind of doesn't make sense, because when you have mountain, the law of gravity tells the water to flow down the mountain, but because of these temples, all the nations are going to defy the law of gravity and go from the bottom of the mountain to the temple, which shows that the Lord's laws sometimes do not always always we could rationalize around it. And that's kind of an interesting point there to point out, that these mountains are going to be important before the Lord comes, and there's a reason why there's going to be temples in these last days. And then it goes on to say that many people shall go, and they'll be coming unto this, come ye and let us go to this mountain. Like, people are going to invite their friends to come into the temple to partake of these, the Lord's instructions, and the law from Zion is going to go forth from these temples. So this is what Isaiah sees in this vision. It's those last days that these temples are going to be established, and it's going to be a big blessing to those who partake of these temple blessings. And then verse 4, what they're talking about be the swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. This is going to happen in the millennium. And what this is saying is, imagine if we take all the money from war and we put that into helping people come unto God. Like, imagine how much better this world will be. But it's kind of unrealistic in this world right now, because we don't have a righteous leader present on this world. And so this is why Isaiah talks about this. He sees this happening in the millennium after the last days. And the very last verse, O house of Jacob, come ye, let us walk in the light of the Lord. This is cool. This is the Lord talking to us. I'm inviting you to walk with me and teach us of his ways and teach of his paths. Like, we're never going to have to do war anymore when we follow the Savior. And it's kind of a cool set of verses here to talk about the temple and the last days before the Lord comes again. So here's just a couple of notes. If you want to just pause the video, you can read over some of the highlights I pointed out. Temples is a place that defies the law of nature. And it really does, because when we read the Bible, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the Bible. Like, what the heck? Like, Moses departing the Red Sea? Like, how is that even possible? And that shows you the Lord's power it's mind-boggling to the human mind. And so, teach of us his ways. What is his way and paths? That's the question I have for you. And that's the doctrine of Jesus Christ. And that's what Isaiah is going to be teaching us throughout this chapter. So now, this is the first 5 verses. We're kind of like, okay, so Isaiah is talking about temples in the last days. The next 3 verses are going to set up the context for the rest of the chapter. And let's go ahead and read that. Verses 2, 6 to 9. Therefore thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob, because they be replenished from the east, and are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they please themselves in the children of strangers. So that verse is talking about, like, Israel wants to look to the east, where they're an idolatrous nation. They're wicked. They don't follow the ways of the Lord. So Israel would much rather kind of follow those people. Their land also is full of silver and gold, neither is there any end of their treasures. Their land is also full of horses, neither is there any end of their chariots. So these lands to the east, they have so much money. Like, money could buy anything in this world, but it cannot buy your salvation, is what God is going to tell us. Their land is full of horses, and their end of the chariots. That means these guys are wartime mongers. Like, they got power and money, and these things are important to them. Verse 8, their land is also full of idols, and they worship the work of their own hands, that which their own fingers have made. I want to point out that phrase, the worship of the work of their own hands. They love creating things and worshiping those things and relying on those things. They love replacing God with the works of their own hands. And you can see that a lot today. Like, a lot of people would much rather play around with their work of their own hands than rather spend that time learning about God and following God. Verse 9, and the mean man bowed down, and the great man humbleth himself, therefore forgive them not. So the mean man, it's not talking like angry, like that's kind of how I first read it. It was like, oh my goodness, this guy is rude or whatnot, but it's more in mathematical terms. The mean man means average. So the average person, like the common man, like me and all of you guys, they humble himself, and there's other translation, not, and they forget the not. Like, they would much rather follow the works of their own hands than follow God. And so this is the context for the rest of the chapter. And here's a couple points here is what description of this person is Isaiah is describing. It's this person who's lofty, this person who's prideful, and this person's very materialistic. This culture that they're living in, and these countries are very materialistic, and they rely on these materials for safety, for guidance, for direction. And they care not about God, because why would you want to follow God if these materials can provide for all your everyday needs? And that's one of the points that God is going to talk about and he's going to address later on. In today's time, we could relate this to us. We live in a very materialistic culture, like iPhones. Everyone has an iPhone. Computers. People worship celebrities. People not worshiping the Sabbath. People have all these false idols and all these materials that they created with their own hands. And that's the issue, is if those things get in the way between our relationship between us and God, this is an issue that needs to be addressed in our lives and every day. So in Isaiah 2:8, the works of their own hands, this is kind of, I already started talking about this. So there's a lot of materials in this world that we have to be careful about. So does this mean I can never ever buy an iPhone or own an expensive house ever again? The answer is no. I mean, it depends on your intents of your heart. If you still worship God and you still love Him and you still have a good relationship with Him, of course God wants to bless you with all those things. God has blessed many people throughout the scriptures with lots of material wealth and good being. But the problem is if those things get in our way between our relationship with God, then it can really hinder our spiritual progression. Because these materialism, we cannot take it with us into the next life. Like, once we have here and we die, we leave it here and we sacrifice for the now versus the future. And so that's the other thing, is as long as you keep the bigger picture, materialism can corrupt your view and keep you have a narrow vision. It keeps you thinking about now and tomorrow versus a week later, 10 years later. And we need to learn about the eternal perspective and keep it in our minds. And the eternal perspective I'm going to reference back to many times throughout Isaiah, because he gives that as an answer a lot of our problems, is guys, quit thinking about the here and now. Think about when you die. Think about the eternities. Like, you're going to live a trillion, billion years after this life. Like, it's mind-boggling to think about. And then here's verses 2:9, kind of like what I was saying. The great man humbled himself. 2 Nephi 2:9 in the Book of Mormon corrects it, adding the word not afterwards. And so this is kind of the theme of this chapter, why I choose to be humble or compelled to be humble by the Lord for not choosing to be humble. Like, the Lord must have humble people in the last days. Just like Isaiah's vision he saw. There's going to be temples being built. There's got to be goodness going around. But if everyone in the last days is wicked, that's why Noah and the ark was flooded and the entire world was destroyed so they could start again. And so it's up to us. It's a choice we have to choose choose to be humble or choose not to be humble. And so this is the context for the rest of the chapter. And I think these next couple chapters are pretty cool because Isaiah is going to look into the last days. He's going to look and be like, wow, this is kind of crazy. I don't know how to describe this, but I'm going to try my best. So 10 through 14, enter into the rock and hide thee in the dust for the fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty. The lofty looks of man shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. For the day of the Lord of hosts, is kind of when the second coming. It's not going to be a happy day for those who are proud and lofty, but it's going to be a happy day for those who are righteous. For the day, verse 12, for the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon everyone that is proud and lofty, and upon everyone that is lifted, and he shall be brought low, and upon all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, and upon all the oaks of Bashan. So the cedar of Lebanon is this type of wood that's in Lebanon. It's extremely valuable, super rare. It's kind of like gold back in the days. Like, it's a building material, and it's super rich. Like, King Solomon in the Old Testament demanded that temple be built at cedars of Lebanon. It's these thick trees. They're super tall, and they're really great for building. And this is the material, so proud and lofty. They used their own hands to build. They used the cedars. They used the finest materials and all the land to bring them high, and they're lifted up. And upon all the high mountains and upon all the hills that are lifted up. Verses 15 through 18. And upon every high tower, and upon every fenced wall, and upon all the ships of Tarshish, and upon all the pleasant pictures. And the loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of man shall be made low. And the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day, and the idols he shall utterly abolish. So these 8 verses is talk about the day of the Lord. It's going to come. It's going to come for everyone. No matter where you're hiding, it's going to get you. And so it's going to talk about the timeline when the day of the Lord is going to come. Get every wicked person will come to the terms of justice. And there's going to be disasters, nature. God could control nature. And we'll see more of this stuff happening. And in 14 to 16, you saw like high tower, fenced wall, ships of Tarshish. You can see we love building high towers, like the tallest skyscrapers. People brag about it. We got the biggest shipping ships in the world, like Isaiah sees these. And like the Great Wall of China, like we build walls everywhere to protect our property, to protect our materialism. And this is the thing, is people get very narrow-sighted when they focus on these things, and that's why we have to keep eternal perspective. So that the day of the Lord is going to come for everyone. Like, no one's going to be able to escape it. And the next couple of verses is going to kind of talk more about the day of the Lord coming for everyone. Verses 19 through 22. And they shall go into the holes of the rock, into the caves of the earth, for the fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty, and he shall rise it to shake terribly the earth. And that day a man shall cast his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which they made each one for himself to worship, to the moles and to the bats, to go into the clefts of the rocks and into the tops of the ragged rocks, for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty, when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. Seize ye from man whose breath is not in his nostril, for where and is he to be accounted of? So there's a lot of points to point out into here, and kind of like adding on to the narrative that we've been talking about all throughout this chapter is these people love to make things with their own hands. They love to be creative. They want to be innovative and try and escape the day of the Lord, or to become materialistic, and they enjoy it. These men don't even need God in their lives. That's who we're talking about. And they don't care if they have a relationship with him. And so, verse 19, they go into the holes of the rocks. Like, these people are going to hide in the caves. They're going to build underground bunkers so they could try and escape on the day of the Lord. Because the Lord is going to shake the earth terribly. Like, he's going to shake our world, and it's going to make us challenge our beliefs. So, choose ye this day who you will serve. It's a famous phrase from the Bible. The Lord is going to shake the world eventually, and it already shakes our world now, and it's up to us to what we do. People will cast away their idols because it's useless. Like, how's an iPhone going to help me from the day of the Lord? He's going to come down and, yeah, here's my iPhone. Scary Lord, like, scare you away. Like, that's not possible. And so people are going to cast away. They're going to freak out. They're going to be like, what am I supposed to do? Like, my underground bunkers aren't going to protect me. And so this day is going to be coming, and it's going to come hard. It's going to hit hard, and it's going to hit loud and clear to those who deserves it. And so here's the question, is why does Isaiah in the same chapter go from talking about temples to people running and hiding in caves? Like that's kind of the question I kind of asked earlier, is there's these two, like we talked about temples, and now we're talking about people hiding in caves. And so is a doomsday bunker safe enough to be in during the last days, or in the house of the Lord is more safer? And that's the question you got to ask yourself. Is the reason why Isaiah talks about temples is because in the last days, that's where we should be. That's where we'll be safe when the Lord shakes our world. If we run to our idols, they can't even save us. Nothing can save us except for the Lord. And that's why having a relationship with the Lord is important, and running to him versus our idols is the theme of this chapter. To put away our pridefulness, to put away our loftiness, but to choose the Lord and serve him in the temple is the way we can strengthen our relationship with him and protect ourselves in the last days. There's a couple interesting things I want to point out. Is a man shall cast his idols to the moles and to the bats. Why would Isaiah choose moles and bats? Like, those are two random creatures. But people who are caught up in the material things of the world are blind to the spiritual importance. They're blinded as the more time they spend with worshiping false idols. So yeah, that's essentially what's happening with people when you worship false idols. You become blinded. You become very narrow-sighted you don't get the whole picture. You don't get the spiritual importance of what God is trying to do with this world. You just, all you care about is your phone the next day, or all you care about is your car, driving your car around and showing it off, being proud and lofty. Yeah, those things won't save you in the last days. And then here's the final slide, kind of to wrap up this chapter here. For the fear of the Lord, when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. There's lots of references to the Lord shaking the earth in the last days. I mean, it doesn't have to be like earthquakes, anything like that shaking us, like natural disasters. But it could be like COVID. COVID shaked my world drastically, like it shakes everyone around this world. Like, I'm sure COVID has affected more lives than World War II has affected lives. Like, it's crazy that everyone around this world has probably heard of COVID. It's probably like the most recognizable word in the world. I mean, there's also tragedy and trials. Like, there's lots of things that could shake our world. And it's up to us, like, when tragedy comes into our life, do we turn away from God? Do we go to our materialistic things? Do we go to eating food? Do we go towards our natural man desires, our carnal desires? Or do we choose to turn to God in those times of tragedy? And it does require a lot of faith. Like, I love learning about stories where people have suffered deaths in their families and they chose to forgive the person who did the killing on accident. Like, it takes a lot of faith, a lot of trust in the Lord, turning to God versus turning to our carnal desires and what we think we should do. It's not about us, it's about God. And I really love that message because it really helps me in my life to think about the importance of being able to choose God. And by choosing God, it's going to bless us in this life and also in the next life. That's why we have to keep an eternal perspective. We might not like things the way this world is happening right now, but God understands. God is in control of everything. So there you guys go. That's Isaiah chapter 2. Hope you guys learned something cool from this chapter and enjoyed as much as I enjoyed teaching it to you guys. And hope you guys have a great rest of your day.